The Hammersmith nude murders is the name of a series of 6 murders in West London, England in 1964 and 1965. The victims, all prostitutes, were found undressed in or near the River Thames, leading the press to nickname the killer Jack the Stripper, a reference to Jack the Ripper. 2 earlier murders committed in West London in 1959 and 1963 have also been linked by some investigators to the same perpetrator despite intense media interest and one of the biggest manhunts in Scotland Yard's history. The case is unsolved. Forensic evidence gathered at the time is believed to have been destroyed or lost. Figg was found dead at 5:10 on 17 June 1959 by police officers on routine patrol in Duke's Meadows, Chiswick, on the north bank of the River Thames. The park had a reputation as a lover's lane, and prostitutes were known to take their clients there. Figg's body was found on scrubland between Dan Mason Drive and the river's towpath, approximately 200 yards, 180 m, west of Barnesbridge. Her dress was torn at the waist and open to reveal her breasts. Marks around the neck were consistent with strangulation. Figg's underwear and shoes were missing, and no identification or personal possessions were found. A pathologist concluded that death had occurred between midnight and 2:00 a.m. On 17 June, a post-mortem photograph of Figg's face distributed to the press was independently recognized by her roommate and her mother. Extensive searches of the area, including the riverbed, failed to find Figg's underwear. Lacked style to find Figg's underwear. Black stiletto shoes or white handbag. A police official theorized that she had been murdered by a client in his car after removing her shoes and underwear, and that these and her handbag had then remained in the car after the body was disposed of at Duke's Meadows. The proprietor of a pub on the opposite side of the river to where Figg was found said that on the night of the murder, he and his wife had seen a car's headlights as it parked in that area at 12:05 a.m. Shortly after the lights were switched off, they heard a woman scream. The body of Welsh-born Gwynneth Rees was found on 8 November 1963 at the Barnesborough Council Household Refuse Disposal Site on Townmead Road, Mortlake. The dump was situated 40 yards, 37 m, from the Thames towpath and approximately 1 mile, 1.6 km, from Duke's Meadows. Rees was naked except for a single stocking on her right leg, extending no further up than the ankle. She had been accidentally decapitated by a shovel which workmen had been using to level the refuse. Tailford was found dead on 2 February 1964 on the Thames foreshore below Linden House, the clubhouse of the London Corinthian Sailing Club, west of Hammersmith Bridge. She had been strangled, several of her teeth were missing, and her underwear had been stuffed into her mouth. Lockwood was found dead on 8 April 1964 on the foreshore of the Thames at Corney Reach, Chiswick, not far from where Tailford had been found. With the discovery of this third victim, police realized that a serial murderer was at large. Lockwood was pregnant at the time of her death. East Lothian. Born Barthelemy was found dead on 24 April 1964 in an alleyway at the rear of 199 Boston Manor Road, Brentford. Barthelemy's death gave investigators their first solid piece of evidence in the case. Flecks of paint used in car manufacturing. Police felt that the paint had probably come from the killer's workplace. They therefore focused on tracing it to a business nearby. Scottish. Born Fleming was found dead on 14 July 1964 outside 48 Berrymead Road, Chiswick. Once again, paint spots were found on the body. Many neighbors had also heard a car reversing down the street just before the body was discovered. Brown, a native of Edinburgh, was last seen alive on 23 October 1964 by a colleague who saw her get into a client's car. On 25 November, her body was found in a car park on Horton Street, Kensington. The colleague was able to provide police with an identikit picture and a description of the car, thought to be a gray Ford Zephyr. Brown had testified as a witness for the defense, along with Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davies, at the trial of Stephen Ward in July 1963. Irish immigrant Bridget O'Hara was found dead on 16 February 1965 near a storage shed behind the Heron Trading Estate, Acton. She had been missing since 11 January. Once again, O'Hara's body turned up flecks of industrial paint which were traced to an electrical transformer near where she was discovered. Her body also showed signs of having been stored in a warm environment. The transformer was a good fit for both the paint and the heating. Chief Superintendent John Dew Rose of Scotland Yard, the detective put in charge of the case, interviewed almost 7,000 suspects. In the spring of 1965, the investigation into the murders encountered a major breakthrough when a sample of paint which perfectly matched that recovered from several victims' bodies was found beneath a concealed transformer at the rear of a building on the Heron Factory Estate in Acton. This factory estate faced a paint spraying shop. Shortly thereafter, Durose held a news conference in which he falsely announced that the police had narrowed the suspect pool down to 20 men and that, by a process of elimination, these suspects were being eliminated from the investigation. After a short time, he announced that the suspect pool contained only 10 members and then 3. There were no further known stripper killings following the initial news conference. According to the writer Anthony Summers, Hannah Tailford and Frances Brown, the strippers' third and seventh victims, were peripherally connected to the 1963 Profumo affair. Some victims were also known to engage in the underground party scene in addition to appearing in pornographic movies. Several writers have postulated that the victims may have known each other and that the killer may have been connected to this scene as well. On 27 April 1964, Kenneth Archibald, a 57-year-old caretaker at the Holland Park Lawn Tennis Club, walked into Notting Hill Police Station and voluntarily confessed to the killing of Irene Lockwood. Archibald was charged with the murder and stood trial at the Old Bailey in June 1964. When asked to plead, he retracted his confession and pleaded not guilty. There was no other evidence to link him to the crime, and on 23 June 1964, he was found not guilty by a jury and acquitted by the judge. Justice Neal. For Durose, the most likely suspect was a Scottish security guard called Mungo Ireland, whom Durose first identified in a BBC television interview in 1970 as a respectable married man in his 40s, whom he codenamed Big John. Ireland had apparently been identified as a suspect shortly after Bridget O'Hara's murder, when flecks of industrial paint were traced to the Heron Trading Estate, where he had worked as a security guard shortly after this connection was made. Ireland committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, leaving a note for his wife that read, "I can't stick it any longer, and finished to save you and the police looking for me. I'll be in the garage." While seen by many as a strong suspect in the killings, recent research suggests that Ireland was in Scotland when O'Hara was murdered, and therefore could not have been the stripper. Crime author Neil Milken said the killing stopped after Ireland's death, and the police task force set up to catch the killer was reduced and finally disbanded. Milkins, who wrote the book Who is Jack the Stripper, was an investigative consultant for the BBC documentary Dark Sun, The Hunt for a Serial Killer. On the morning that Ireland's body was found, he had been due to appear before Acton Magistrates Court to face a charge of failing to stop his car after being involved in a road traffic accident, said Mr. Milkins. Did Ireland commit suicide to save facing Acton magistrates over a trifling motoring charge, or did John Dhu Rose push him over the edge with his press statement? The Scotland Yard Serious Crime Review Group reinvestigated the Hammersmith murders between 2006 and 2007, which resulted in a new conclusion. A statement read, "The circumstantial evidence against Mungo Ireland is very strong, and it was the view of the officers conducting the most recent review of this case that he was most likely to be responsible." Although Ireland's work records indicated he was in Scotland on the night of O'Hara's disappearance, Scotland Yard believe it is possible that these may have been falsified. In 2001, reformed gangster Jimmy Tippett Jr. claimed that, during research for his book about London's gangland, he had uncovered information suggesting that British light heavyweight boxing champion Freddie Mills was responsible for the murders. According to Tippett-Cray, era gangsters, including Charlie Richardson and Frankie Fraser, had long suspected Mills of being the murderer. Mills had previously been linked with the murders by Peter Neilly, a freelance journalist from Balham, South London, who told police in July 1972 that he had received information in confidence from a serving chief inspector that Mills killed the nude prostitutes. He also said that this was common knowledge in the West End. Many people would say, "Oh, Freddie did them in." Mills was found shot dead in his car, apparently by suicide, in July 1965. The suggestion that Mills was the Hammersmith nude's murderer originated with gangster Frankie Fraser, who told it to policeman Bob Berry, who told the Sun crime reporter Michael Litchfield. Fraser claimed that the story was confessed by Mills to Scotland Yard Chief Superintendent John Dhu Rose, and told by Dhu Rose to him. But when Dhu Rose published his autobiography, which touched on the Hammersmith nude murders, there was no mention of Freddie Mills with regard to this case. The claims have since been dismissed. Peter McInnes put the allegations to the investigating officer, who stated that Mills had never been a suspect during the investigation. David Seabrook, in his book Jack of Jumps, 2006, wrote that a former Metropolitan Police detective was a suspect in the opinion of several senior detectives investigating the case. Owen Summers, a journalist for the Sun newspaper, had previously raised suspicion about the unnamed officer's involvement in a series of articles published by the newspaper in 1972, and Daily Mirror journalist Brian McConnell followed a similar line of inquiry in his book, Found Naked and Dead in 1974. He was also considered by Dick Kirby, a former Metropolitan Police detective, in his book Laid Bare, The Nude Murders and the Hunt for Jack the Stripper, 2016, in which Kirby referred to him only as the cop. In their book, The Survivor 2002, Jimmy Evans and Martin Short alleged the culprit was Superintendent Tommy Butler of the Metropolitan Police's Flying Squad. Butler died in 1970. The Crime Investigation Channel's Fred Dinenage murder casebook put forward the theory in 2011 that the killer could have been Harold Jones, a convicted murderer from Wales. Jones killed 2 girls in 1920, one in his hometown of Abertillery. Because he was 15 at the time, he was not liable for the death penalty and instead received a life sentence. He was released from Wandsworth Prison in 1941 at the age of 35 for exemplary behavior. He is believed to have then returned to Abertillery and visited the graves of his victims. By 1947, Jones was living in Fulham, London. All the stripper murders had similar features to his early murders, with no sexual assault, but extreme violence inflicted on the victims. Due to poor record keeping, he was never considered as a possible suspect by the police. Jones died in Hammersmith in 1971. The Welsh writer Neil Milkins, in Who Was Jack the Stripper, 2011, also concluded that Jones was the perpetrator. While researching Jones for his book Every Mother's Nightmare, Milkins had traced the murderer's movements. He turned up in Fulham in the late 1940s, calling himself Harry Stevens, and stayed at that address in Hestercombe Avenue until 1962, at which point he disappeared again. I came across the Jack the Stripper case on the internet and realized that in the same 3 years, Jones' whereabouts remained unknown, 1962 to 1965. A number of prostitutes had been murdered in the same West London area. In January 2019, the possible involvement of Jones was re-examined in the 90-minute documentary Dark Sun, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, broadcast on BBC Two. Criminologist Professor David Wilson and an investigative team, including former Detective Jackie Moulton and forensic psychologist Professor Mike Berry, used contemporary policing techniques such as geographic profiling and offender profiling to see if the crimes of Jones the Boy can be measured against those of the London killer. There are many similarities. The murders have been the subject of several television documentaries, Great Crimes and Trials documentary series. The Hammersmith Murders episode, first broadcast in the UK by BBC in 1993. Fred Dinenage, Murder Casebook documentary series, Murders That Shocked a Nation, The Welsh Child Killer, first broadcast in the UK by SCI in 2011. Dark Sun, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, 2018, BBC documentary. This was filmed in both London and Abertillery, and contributors include criminologist David Wilson and writer Robin Gerossi, author of The Hunt for the 60s Ripper. The crime novel Goodbye Piccadilly, Farewell Leicester Square, 1969, written by Arthur LaBerne, is loosely based on the case. The book was adapted for the Alfred Hitchcock movie Frenzy, 1972. The case also inspired The Fiend, 1972, in which a misogynistic serial killer leaves his naked victims across London. The crime novel Bad Penny Blues, 2009, by Cathy Unsworth, is closely based on the case.